This video DVD presents an information session on sexual harassment. The goal is to raise participants' awareness of key issues related to sexual harassment. Learning objectives include understanding the definition of sexual harassment in the workplace, understanding the types of behavior that constitute sexual harassment, gaining insight into the responsibilities of employees, employers, and managers, what to do if you or someone within your organization are being sexually harassed. You may be thinking, why am I here? I already know what sexual harassment is, or this doesn't happen in my workplace. But you are here today to learn about the legal definition of sexual harassment, liability, and what you can do if you believe you are being sexually harassed. Remember, no workplace is immune to sexual harassment. It can occur in any workplace to any employee. It is important to know that sexual harassment is against the law. It is also prohibited by your employer's policy. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the first federal law to prohibit discrimination based on gender and to prohibit unwelcome sexual conduct that leads to a hostile work environment. Since then, many states have enacted laws that expand upon the federal laws. Sexual harassment in the workplace can have significant and adverse impacts on both the employer and employees. It can negatively affect productivity, morale, absenteeism, and the general health and well-being of employees in the workplace. To some extent, every employee is responsible for ensuring a workplace free from harassment. There are different types of responsibility or liability. 1. Corporate liability. An employer may be responsible for harassment by supervisors, managers, workers, and agents of the employer, particularly if the employer knew or should have known about the harassment and did not take action to stop it. Once an employer is aware of harassment, it has an obligation to take immediate action. If the employer finds that allegations of harassment are substantiated, remedies should be implemented that include both a disciplinary and remedial component to ensure that the behavior stops and does not occur in the future. Employers and unions have an obligation to ensure that the working environment is free from sexual harassment or discrimination.
All employees, including supervisors and managers, are responsible for their own behavior and may be held personally liable if they sexually harass other employees or make inappropriate gender-related comments. Managers and supervisors are liable if they knew that harassment was occurring and did not take steps to stop it.
Employers and employees may also be held liable for incidents of sexual harassment that occur outside normal business hours or off-site, but are related to the workplace and impact employment. Example: a supervisor sexually propositions his administrative assistant in the parking lot after a staff holiday party, using texting, email, or other social media like Facebook to embarrass, insult, bully, or tarnish a coworker's reputation. The EEOC defines sexual harassment as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature constitutes sexual harassment when submission to or rejection of this conduct explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. What makes it sexual harassment is the sexualized nature of the comments or behavior. Let's look more closely at the definition. 1. Creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. The law does not protect against isolated incidents, good-natured teasing, or offhand comments. It is when these things are persistent enough to make the workplace unpleasant and threatening to the sufferer that the behavior is considered harassment. However, some behaviors are offensive enough to be sexual harassment with only one occurrence. Example: a supervisor grabs a subordinate employee's breast while she is working. That one action is severe enough to meet the standard of sexual harassment. 2. When submission to or rejection of this conduct explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment. This part of the definition applies to creation of a hostile work environment. It also addresses the point that sexual harassment is about power. If a person in a supervisory role indicates that the recipient's job will be affected, either positively or negatively, because of the recipient's reaction to the behavior, then the behavior is harassment. Example: A supervisor calls an employee in to discuss the employee's future at the company. During the discussion, he tells the employee about another employee who was promoted after engaging in sexual activity with the supervisor. This implicitly implies that the employee is more likely to be promoted if she engages in sexual acts with the supervisor. 3. Unwelcome advances, requests, and other verbal or physical conduct. The key term here is unwelcome. There is both a subjective and objective element to this. First is the harasser's knowledge of how their actions or comments may be interpreted, and second is how the recipient may interpret them. Even if the harasser sincerely does not believe that their actions are offensive, they may still be found to be harassing if the recipient finds them so. While it is recommended that victims of sexual harassment tell the harasser that they find the comments or behavior offensive and unwelcome, the law does not require that a victim protest at the time of harassment. There are many reasons why a victim of sexual harassment may not tell the harasser to stop. Fear of reprisal from the harasser or management, fear of not being believed, fear of damaging further career opportunities, not wanting to make waves or rock the boat. What is not sexual harassment? An occasional compliment, good-natured jokes and jesting where both parties find the conduct acceptable, office romance where both parties enter into a voluntary relationship. It should be noted that this carries risk. What happens if the relationship sours? How will that affect the parties' ability to work together and the comfort level of their coworkers? Normal exercise of supervisory responsibilities including discipline or counseling.
Sexual harassment is about power, not about sex. It's an abuse of power. Although the majority of victims are women, a victim of sexual harassment can be anyone, male or female. In many instances of sexual harassment, there is a power imbalance. The victim may be in a subordinate position, an immigrant, much younger than the harasser, in their first job, financially dependent on the position, physically much smaller than the harasser.
Not all victims react the same way. A victim of harassment may exhibit the following behaviors in the workplace: feeling confused, degraded, angry, frustrated, and humiliated. Physical and emotional problems, withdrawal from coworkers, and absenteeism. When an individual is being harassed in the workplace, there can be negative effects on the entire workplace. Increased stress, lack of trust among employees and between employees and management, employees leaving for other work, decreased productivity, increased workload as a result of turnover. Who can be a harasser? The victim's supervisor, a supervisor in another area of the company, a coworker, someone outside the company, a client or supplier, a woman or a man, the same sex as the victim. Types of sexual harassment. Human rights law addresses different types of sexual harassment. Quid pro quo. This type of sexual harassment involves a person in a position of authority who either implicitly or explicitly makes sexual behavior a condition of employment. A boss might say, "Sleep with me and you will get a raise. Don't and you'll be fired." Typically, however, the sexual solicitation is often implied and the reward or punishment only hinted at. Example: a boss talks to his young secretary about his frigid wife. He implies that if he were sexually satisfied, it would benefit her and the office, implying that rewards would follow upon having sex with him. The second type of sexual harassment involves behavior or comments that create a hostile work environment. This is a work environment where the behavior is so objectionable that it creates unequal terms or conditions of employment. A hostile work environment can be created by the behavior or comments of any employee, coworker, supervisor, or manager. Comments not directed at an individual may still create a hostile environment if that individual is a member of the targeted group. Example: every time Jill, a female employee at a production plant, crossed the floor, she was required to run the gauntlet. Male employees engaged in catcalls, comments about her body, whistling, and sexual invitations. It reached the point where Jill dreaded changing locations, And when she did, she often arrived jittery and upset, resulting in errors in her work. Eventually, Jill was terminated from her position for performance reasons. In some cases, comments or conduct may not be salacious, but rather target an individual's gender based on stereotypes. This, too, is a form of sexual harassment and can create a hostile work environment. Example, a supervisor says that women don't belong in the workplace, but should be home in the kitchen. Another jokes that women are only good for one thing. Stereotyping comments like these are demeaning and contribute to a hostile atmosphere where women do not feel comfortable or welcome. Typically, when we think of sexual harassment, we think of females as victims and males as perpetrators. That doesn't mean, however, that males cannot be victims of sexual harassment. In fact, while rare, there is case law in both Canada and the United States where men have been victims. There have also been reported incidents of same-sex sexual harassment.
Examples of sexual harassment or inappropriate gender-related comments or conduct. Continual conversation of a sexual nature. Persistent and offensive jokes of a sexual or gender-specific nature. Suggestive or insulting sounds. Example, whistling or catcalls. Lewd gestures. Sexual comments about body shape, clothes, weight. Inquiries about a person's sex life or relationship with partner. Unnecessary physical contact, i.e. pinching, touching, patting, brushing up against another. Condescending or paternalistic treatment. Unsolicited personal or intimate gift-giving. Repeated requests for dates.
Not everyone agrees on what behaviors constitute sexual harassment. Is one person's point of view more legitimate than another? No, sexual harassment is often said to be in the eye of the beholder. Comment or conduct that is perfectly acceptable to one person may constitute harassment to another. These different perceptions arise out of different points of view. For example, a Muslim woman may find sexual discussion acutely embarrassing, while her coworkers may differ. However, the Muslim woman's perspective is just as reasonable and legitimate as any other, and if the behavior is not related to the performance of the job, then it is arguably sexual harassment and should cease. Remember, in establishing whether sexual harassment took place, proof of intent to harass is not required. Instead, the focus is on the impact of the behavior.
The Muslim woman's coworkers may not have intended to harass her. In fact, by engaging her in sexual discussions, they may have been trying to include her in the group and make her feel welcome. Instead, the behavior made her uncomfortable and was felt as sexual harassment. Behavior that is harmless or good-natured to one person may be derogatory and insulting to another. To some women, terms like darling, girls, or sweetheart are acceptable, while to others, these expressions are objectifying and demeaning. Continuing to ask a woman out or calling her sweetheart, despite her objection, is sexual harassment.
Context is essential in assessing any behavior. Consider this situation and whether you think it constitutes sexual harassment. An invitation from the boss for an after-work drink. Scenario 1. Offered to several long-term employees in the presence of others after an important contract is won. Scenario 2. Offered to a subordinate of the opposite sex behind closed doors during a performance appraisal. This example shows that each situation must be examined carefully, given its context and the points of view of the persons involved. If you were sexually harassed, remember that it's not your fault. Harassers are responsible for their own behavior. The harassment most likely won't stop if you ignore it. It may actually get worse.
A person who believes she or he is being sexually harassed can take a number of steps. They are progressive and include: tell the person to stop.
Anyone experiencing sexual harassment should advise the perpetrator that their behavior is unwelcome, offensive, and considered sexual harassment. If the harassment persists or the person feels uncomfortable approaching the perpetrator, he or she should speak to the person's supervisor. Where the person feels uncomfortable approaching the perpetrator, he or she should take the matter to his or her immediate supervisor. If the immediate supervisor is party to the harassment, then the person complaining should bring the matter to the next level of supervision. If you are a member of a bargaining unit, speak with a union representative. Most collective agreements include clauses dealing with sexual harassment and discrimination. As well, labor arbitrators have the authority to interpret and apply human rights legislation in their cases.
Make a complaint through your organization's internal harassment complaint resolution process. Many organizations have an internal complaint process whereby employees can make either a formal or informal complaint that will be investigated.
Contact the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Ask yourself the following. 1. Would I want my behavior on the evening news? 2. Would I want my partner to know about what I'm doing or saying? 3. Is there equal power between me and the person I'm interacting with? 4. Would I want someone else to act this way toward my partner, my son or daughter? 5. Is there equal consent? 6. Is there mutual respect? We hope this session has provided you with more information about sexual harassment, including the adverse effect it can have on both the victim and the employer, your liability, and steps you can take if you believe you were being harassed. It is everyone's right to work in and responsibility to ensure an environment free from harassment and discrimination.